Good morning. I'm Adrienne Arsht, Executive Vice Chair of the Atlantic Council and founder of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center. I'm delighted that the Latin America Center has partnered with the GeoEconomics Center to kick off the Atlantic Council programming around this week of the spring IMF and World Bank meetings. And I'm particularly excited that Mexico's Minister of Finance and Public Credit, Arturo Herrera, is here at this virtual Atlantic Council gathering as part of our focus on the economic recovery of emerging markets in 2021. It is fitting that Minister Herrera is with us today, as he was appointed this year as chairman of the Board of Governors of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. This is the first time that Mexico has held this position since the 1950s. It will certainly be a busy week for you, Minister. For his IMF presidency, Minister Herrera has said he will focus on the global recovery from COVID with a prioritization of poorer countries, and he will work to strengthen the international financial system. Mexico is the second largest economy in Latin America and the United States' second biggest trading partner. Mexico and the direction of its economy are vital to the US recovery and the global recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. In the immediate term, things are improving, in large part due to Minister Herrera's spectacular work. Just last week, Mexico's Minister of Finance made an upward revision of his 2021 growth forecast. We look forward to building on our extensive work with Mexico to further advance the bilateral relationship at this very critical moment. And now, on to the program. Following Minister Herrera's remarks, Josh Lipsky, director of the GeoEconomics Center, will moderate a conversation with the minister that will include questions from the Atlantic Council senior fellows. And now I turn it over to Finance Minister Herrera.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. One problem we have is that we are getting used to having these virtual meetings. I was trying to remember, it was 2 years ago when we had our last in-presence meeting during the spring meetings, and I think I had a chance, opportunity to be with you during the October 2019 annual meeting. So it has been a long ride since then. And I guess in tune with that kind of setup, I'll probably will start my presentation in what it would have been a completely bizarre and different way of chatting by a finance minister, but it's something that we are getting used to use these days. So just so that you have an idea, I'm going to give you the number of vaccines that are being shipped and are arriving to Mexico this week. And we have 3.9 million vaccines from AstraZeneca arriving today, 620 from CanSino on Wednesday, and 1.5 million from Pfizer arriving tomorrow, and then 1.1 from AstraZeneca from a different source arriving on Friday. And why is that important, given that you are in DC and you are not going to be vaccinated by this one? It's just that this week, the total number adds up to 7.1 million shots. And that's around the total number that the country had put until 2 weeks ago. So just in 1 week, we have been inoculating more or less the same number of people that we inoculate between the last week of December and, let's say, the second week of March. So that means that we are moving from a setup in which we have little vaccines to one in which the challenge is going to be to have enough vaccinators, enough people putting shots. And that's exactly what is going to put us in a completely different trend, both on the health part and also on the economic part, which is the one which I'm responsible. We are expected to have to conclude this week the second milestone of our vaccination program. The first one was to be able to provide shots to people working in COVID hospitals. The second one is to vaccinate everybody over 60 or all senior citizens. And at some point, I guess probably around Thursday or Friday, we will be completing that. And next week we will be, and that's an interesting twist from the economic perspective. We will start vaccinating teachers. And why is this important? Is because that changed the focus of the program from first starting to those who are more exposed or most vulnerable to then those which will allow us to start opening certain sectors of the economy and being able to open schools at some point in the next few weeks is going to be extremely important. It's going to be extremely important for several reasons. One is for the kids itself, but another one is for equity issues related to the economy. As the kids, like in most parts of the world, has stayed in home taking classes, one of the parents very often needs to stay with them, just taking care of them, and very often that's the women at home. So it has the fact that schools are not open is having an impact in the students per se, but it's also having an equity impact in the labor market. Like in most countries, the ones who are more vulnerable are female. Two-thirds of people staying at home are women. But let me get back to where I started. We in a very schematic way have divided the whole COVID process in 4 phases. The first phase was a big lockdown, which in Mexico officially started on April 1st of last year, about a year ago, and spans for 2 months, April and May. The truth is that although that's where the large impact on the economy was felt, in several sectors and in certain particular regions, it started to be felt before that. And there are a few states in Mexico which have a very distinctive presence of the tourist activity, and that's Quintana Roo, where Cancun is, and Los Cabos. And it's also where probably close to 70-80% of the tourists are from abroad. So in those states, the crisis started to be felt, not when the lockdown started in Mexico, but when the lockdown started abroad. So the cycle is actually much more closely related to the one in the US. And because these are very, very concentrated economies, which with not much of the diversification, that's where the crisis was felt more. Just so I'll give you an idea, and this was the extreme case in Mexico. In Quintana Roo, 24% of all the formal jobs were lost during the lockdown. That's also a period of great uncertainty in the world, as it may happen with a new virus. Nobody was clear how long will it last, what will be all the complex economic ramifications. And one of the most important impacts of that was the acceleration of risk aversion. And between February last year and March last year, the peso moved from being from 18 pesos per dollar to around 25 pesos per dollar. So even before we start having an impact on the health front, and even before we started to have an impact on the real economy, we start having impacts on the financial part and exchange rate. So that's why some of the first reactions of the government during the big lockdown were not necessarily related to the real economy, but related to the financial sector. So during March, we extend the number of hedging and forwards both in Mexico and liquidated in pesos. We introduced several measures with the banking regulator that allow firms and persons to postpone the payments of that service without falling into default. That was probably one of the most successful measures, etc. And that's during the Great Lockdown is when we ramp up all our health capability. Right now, everybody is focusing on vaccines and vaccination and vaccination speed in the world. But about a year ago, everybody was trying to get ventilators and making sure that we have enough beds, etc. It's interesting how priorities have been changing over time. So that period ends on May, on the last day of May, and that's when we very cautiously start reopening the economy. And the way that we did it was in a very, I would say, unusual way. Rather than start reopening, we relabeled three sectors, and we label them as being essential sectors. And those sectors, and I'm going to start with the one which is much closer related to our relationship with abroad, and particularly with the U.S., was the auto sector. And the idea was that given that the U.S. started their lockdown before, and they also finished their lockdown before us, we need to synchronize the opening of the auto sector, which is extremely connected to the value-added change of the car industry in the U.S., to the time in which the U.S. will open that. Before that, one of the main bets of Mexico about how to push the economy up was on the free trade agreement. The free trade agreement was signed just a few weeks before COVID started in the world. So we were trying to position the country again in the trade front. The second sector was the construction sector, and there were several reasons why was this important to us. One of them is that the construction sector is a leading indicator. It tends to move ahead on the cycle, but it's also an activity that is mostly done in non-closed spaces. So the probability of contagion during that was smaller. So that's where we started on June 1st last year. And little by little, we're starting to opening the economy. And that's exactly what you look on the numbers. During the lockdown, the impact on the economy was extremely high. And it's not surprising that during the second quarter of last year, we have a reduction on the economic activity of 18.7 percentage points. Just so that you have an idea, the largest drop on a yearly basis of the Mexican economy was during the Great Depression in 1932, and that was around 14%. So the impact of COVID on the Mexican economy during the second quarter was larger than our worst worst year on the Great Depression. But the numbers are starting to improve since June 1st, and we have a better third quarter, and actually an even better fourth quarter. The fact is, by the end of the fourth quarter, there were very specific sectors that were already starting to perform better than the pre-COVID period, and those were the sectors related to exports and manufacturing. So everything was going in a much better shape, except that the recovery is asymmetrical. I mean, those sectors which are highly intensive in human contact are lagging way behind, and that's movie cinemas, gyms, hotels, airline, transport, etc. And there are some other sectors that are doing there. Our second phase started, as I said, in June 1st, and actually finished on just before Christmas Eve on December 21st. And that's when we got the first shipment of vaccines. And for those which were, I mean, we started to apply them a day later. So actually, the first shot was put on Christmas Eve on December 21st. Very good timing. And the idea is that when we start into the vaccination period is when we will start changing the shape, both on the health issues, but also on the economic front. We expect during this period, probably around June, in a month and a half, 2 months, to have around close to 80 million shots being administered, and that is going to start getting us close to the herd immunity. But that's also what will start getting us close to being able to open the economy fully. And that our fourth phase is that exactly what we will be a post-pandemic economy. Now, the post-pandemic economy, as we are thinking about it, and as I know the people are thinking about it in the US and in many other places, shouldn't be just where we left it in 2019. 2020 shouldn't be thought as an impasse between where we were and just restart there. There are many things that COVID brought to the surface and are making very visible for all of us. One issue, just for starters, is inequality. Although everybody is at risk of being infected by COVID, the fact is that those who have jobs which cannot be done virtually, the fact is that those who are at the lower end of the income distribution are much more risk to do that. And by the way, same is happening with the vaccination. I happened to be in Chicago last week, exactly a week ago. We were trying to make sure to include some Mexicans who have been living abroad there for years into the financial sector. So we were handing their first banking accounts in a Mexican bank as opposed to a US bank, and have an opportunity to chat a little bit about it. And the US vaccination program the rollout is impressive. You guys are applying an average close to 3 million vaccines per day. And I was checking the numbers for yesterday; they were close to 4 million. But for the Hispanic and the African American communities, the numbers are very different. The Hispanic community has half of what they should be done proportionally to their population, and it's basically because they don't know where to go, how to be reached, etc., or they are afraid or be given their legal status. But that's happening everywhere in every sector. So inequality is one of the issues. The other aspect for the post-COVID economy is to recognize that health services were extremely important for the pandemic, but now we have to make it extremely important for the post-pandemic world. The only health challenge is not COVID. There are many health challenges, and we need to take advantage that we scale up our health services and take it from there, from our new trends. And the third one, and I'll probably want to stop with this at the moment, is that COVID put a large stress on the economy, but also on public finances. And it did it in a two different way and in an asymmetric way. Countries need to spend more on health, so that's something that was unplanned in 2020. But also, as the economy took a hit, the revenues related to economic activity, like the value-added tax or the revenue taxes, went down. And same happened at the sub-sovereign level. So one thing that we face is the need to have and to build moving forward stronger fiscal systems, both as a sovereign at that sovereign level. I'll probably, John, stop here to allow for a few Q&A.
Minister, thank you so much for that opening and those comments and outlining what's happening in the Mexican economy, which I think is so important for every country in the world as we think of global economic recovery. What you just outlined, bits and pieces of it, every country is dealing with on different levels. And so as we go into IMF World Bank spring meetings, I think there's so many lessons to be learned here. I want to turn to three of our senior fellows for just short questions. I know your time is precious and you have a busy week ahead, but I want to start with Dr. Nicole Golden, Senior Fellow at the GeoEconomics Center. She's previously worked at the World Bank. She's been lead economist and policy advisor for the Bank Solutions for Youth Employment Coalition and worked on the education, jobs, and social urban resilience practice. Nicole, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Josh. And thank you, Mr. Minister. It's really a pleasure to hear from you and to get your perspectives going into this important week. We know that a resilient, vibrant small business sector and SME supply chains are critical to economic growth and recovery in Mexico. And I understand from some IMF data that special loans of at least 40 billion pesos have been made to SMEs to enable them to keep their employees on during the pandemic, during some of the shutdown, as well as special loans to family business, which are also so critical. So going forward, do you plan to kind of expand or continue these kinds of initiatives? What other kinds of initiatives do you have in mind to support the small business sector? And how important is recovery in the regional economy to Mexican SMEs?
Yeah, there are several ways to answer that. The first one, and probably the most important, is to provide a very, very brief glimpse of what the labor force is structured in Mexico. And one had to remind painfully that 57% of all the jobs are in the informal sector. So when we talk about SMEs, and particularly the very little firms or the family firms, very likely they are in the informal sector. So that means several things. Among one of them is that it's much more difficult for them to get credit, and particularly credits during a crisis. They have a much more scattered financial history if they have a history as a firm at all. So we were aware that the very large firms will get a financing one way or the other during the crisis. But we were extremely concerned by these little firms, and that's the set of loans that we provide that you may reference. But during the summer and in coordination with the central bank, we provide several other facilities. One probably, and I mentioned it just in passing during my presentation, but was probably the one with the best results by far, is a change that we did in an accounting regulatory measure in the banking regulator. And basically, when a firm of any size or a person goes and restructure a credit in a matter that is basically forced to, in an accounting base, is basically recorded as a default. It's basically that person was unable to meet their financial commitments, and it has to be recorded as it's a forced restructure, and in that sense, it's put in a credit rating list, and the bank has to take a hit in their capital and reserve it against it. What we did was we provide a special provision recognizing that these were special conditions, and that some firms that are completely viable, small and large, wouldn't be able to fulfill their commitments for a few weeks. At the time that when we did this, we weren't sure how long it would be. We initially started with, I guess, with 2 months, and then we extended to the end of August. And just by changing the way in which this is accounted, it allows them to postpone the payments of capital and interest. But it also allows the banks to restructure the credits without the need to bring reserves against it, which would have backfired because a bank with a smaller balance sheet will be even less prone to provide lending to the economy. Now, the result by the end of August was that 1 in every 5 pesos lent by the banking sector was restructured. The second thing is close to 1.8 billion pesos. That's the amount of overall that was restructured. More often than not, it was small firms and small enterprises the one who took this opportunity, and in smallest informal firms, part of the capital that is put there could be paid from the credit card of the owner of the small firm. So that one is the one that I think that it was much more successful. Now let me tell you which ones in which we bet a lot, but it really didn't pan out as we expected, and we really need to keep coming to that. And there were 2 things that the central bank did, and that we were really, really hopeful. They reduced the reserve requirements from the bank, so they brought back close to the equivalent of $15 billion to the banks in money, in fresh money that they could lend to the firms. And then they put another $15 billion in soft loans that could be guaranteed just with any other kind of asset or liquid asset, and there was some attachment to that, and the idea that they will be lent to the private sector, and particularly to the small firms. Now, as the banks were feeling uneasy about economic conditions, they were demanding certain guarantees, and we were able to provide those guarantees from the development banks. And that were close to 70%. And that wasn't sufficient for them. They were demanding 90% guarantee, but that's basically us making a loan and getting the hit, and there was our default, and they getting the profit, and if it's fine now. And we really thought that was unfair with everybody. And as a result of that, this is a program that has been unfolding slower than we expected, and that's where we think that we need to focus. There are some very good news coming from the banking sector. For those who are familiar with the Mexican economy, you basically know that during the 1995-94 crisis, the banking sector was basically bankrupt. So it was in a way kind of the culprits of the financial crisis. Today is the opposite. We were expecting them to have a hit. Their capitalization rate was 15% before the crisis. It's 17% right now. So they have a stronger balance sheet. So they are not a factor in the crisis, but they should be a factor in the recovery. That extra money that they have, they should be willing to quietly. I mean, we don't expect them to hand in money, but they should be to wisely lend it to the economy. That's the role.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. We know that debt financing and debt recovery, clearly on the micro level as well as the macro level, will be a key theme and a key part of the discussions going forward this week at the World Bank IMF. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicole. So next question, I want to turn to Bosco Marti, a senior fellow at the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center. And Bosco is former executive director for Mexico and Dominican Republic at the Inter-American Development Bank. And as you know, has served in senior roles in the Mexican government. So Bosco, over to you.
Thank you very much, Secretary. We know that there's a strong alignment between Presidents López Obrador and President Biden towards collaboration around migration, and especially to address the root causes of migration in southern Mexico and Central America. Since the beginning of the administration, you have been a great champion of collaboration with your peers from Central America, together with international financial organizations. Could you share with us your experience and the areas that you have identified to work together with the region?
Yeah, thank you, Bosco. I think we share a common view with many of the relevant stakeholders. And even I think for a while from the US government has been recognized that being able to develop Central America, it has been important. Now, the reasons behind those thoughts may be different from one administration to another one. There are administrations within which it's important because that's the right thing to do, and it's important because we want to have a less unequal world. There are some administrations who thought it was important because for security issues. And what is different from what we are trying to do along with my peers, with the finance ministers, is that we know that every single effort costs money, right? So it's not sufficient to dream about what kind of development we want for Central America and Mexico, since their economies are extremely interconnected. But we also need to make sure what is feasible to do and when. Now, by the way, let me just start by mentioning one of the premises of our work. As everybody know, the southern part of Mexico is the poorest part of the country, and the GDP per capita in Mexico City is close to 7 times the GDP per capita of Chiapas. That means that the economic activity and some relevant issues, social issues in Chiapas are closer to the ones in Guatemala than the ones in central Mexico and the northern of Mexico. So when we think about the development of the South, it's not necessarily only about the development in Central America, but also the development in Mexico. Now, our own premise is that when we need to develop Mexico, the southern part of Mexico, we need to change the structural conditions. It's not sufficient to leave it up to the markets. The markets were not investing in Oaxaca, Chiapas, or Guerrero. They were investing in middle Mexico and in the border with the U.S. And one of the reasons why this was happening is that the infrastructure is really poor in southern Mexico. So even if labor is cheaper there, it's not worthwhile to invest there, because then it takes it's very costly to move goods from there. So what we are doing is investing in all the way from Tabasco southward, and the impact of doing that is twofold. One, you have an impact when the infrastructure is done as a permanent one, but then you have an impact when the infrastructure is built, and that I have to admit I was surprised by how large this impact could be. About 3 months ago, probably a little bit more, I visited the refinery in Dos Bocas, and I was trying to understand the business there, but I was reviewing numbers when I was going down there, and then I realized by comparing numbers that there were only 3 states at the time in Mexico which was gain back all the jobs lost during the pandemic, and they have actually add up jobs in the following months. So those are states which actually at the time were better off than before the pandemic hit, and those were Baja and Chihuahua, border states with the U.S., and Tabasco. And Tabasco was basically explained just by one single public investment project. And that same idea has to be taken down to Central America. So at the time we have been working with them in 3 areas in which we think we could make some progress. One is developing a common fixed capital market, and that I think we are relatively close to be able to do it. The second one is related also to infrastructure in a much broader way, but with the same idea of being able to take goods from the south to the north, and it's infrastructure related to transport and customs. Our Central American friends have been able to sort of build a customs union from Guatemala backwards, but then our border means a border in more than one way. So what we try to agree with them, and we have been working on that for months, is to be able to have a speed agreement for goods at the Guatemalan border, and that will be when you have a joint revision on both sides of the border, and then you don't need to double that, and that has an incredible impact on economic activity, because currently trucks could be there for close to 20 hours. Now that means also that trucks, if they are taking perishable goods, they need to be refrigerated, etc. The cost starts adding that. Those two, we think we are close to get some meaningful achievement in the next few months. But the largest one and the most ambition is to be able to have some sort of an energy line going across there. We were able to finalize the agreement that we have to get gas from Texas to Veracruz. Our idea is now to bring it down to the southern states of Mexico, and eventually that should be able. We should be able to connect it to Central America. Having expensive energy, we are convinced is one of the much more relevant barriers in Central America. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm glad we touched on energy as well. It's such a critical topic. And I think it's a good transition to our final question from Ambassador Tony Wayne. Ambassador Wayne's a senior fellow with us at the GeoEconomics Center, and he's an accomplished diplomat, and perhaps most relevant for this conversation, recently serves as the U.S. Ambassador to Mexico. Tony, over to you.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for being with us, Mr. Secretary. So one of the things you mentioned that affected many is the drop in revenue during the pandemic period. And of course, Mexico was already challenged, having a lowest percentage in the OECD of percent collection of revenue as a percent of GDP. And the IMF had already been speaking with you about tax reform. What are you thinking about the prospects of tax reform going forward in what is clearly still a difficult recovery period, and a period in which you had the poverty levels rising in the country? But you do need some reform in the ability to collect more of the revenue that's due to the government. I'd appreciate your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. What I'm trying to do is to approach this issue in a stage-wise mode. I think this is something that Mexico has been thinking for a long time, probably at least since the time you were around here, and we have been unable to make any meaningful success on that front. And there are several reasons for that. One very obvious, which is not necessarily extremely valid right now, is that we used to have very cheap and very easy to extract oil. So although the numbers in terms of tax collection look bad, there were some non-tax revenues that were readily available. But that's not the case right now. We don't have the oil production that we have in 2004. In fact, it's half of that. But also, we don't have the oil prices that we had in 2008, 2009, when the price of oil went north of $100 per barrel. In fact, about a year ago, for several kinds of oils in the market, including the Mexican, the price crossed the zero barrier. So somebody was paying for taking the oil out of the hands of the producers. And that also underscores one of the risks of have an oil-dependent revenue structure, which is the price of oil is extremely volatile. But the budget, which is what you fund with those resources, does not have that flexibility. So Mexico needs to have a much robust and much more reliable sources of revenue. So what is my approach right now? I'm engaging together with the secretaries of finance of the states in a technical discussion, in a discussion about what is needed. And we want to agree in a broader terms during the next few weeks in the technical aspects of that. And why I'm stressing the technical issues, because this is not also a COVID season in Mexico. This is not also a very difficult economic period in Mexico. This is also political season in Mexico. We will have the largest elections ever in June 6th. We have, just so that you have an idea, we have 32 states in Mexico, if you included the city of Mexico with tenures of 6 years. So on average, we should be changing between 5 to 6 governors every single year. We're changing 15 out of the 32 this year. So basically, half of all the governors are up, same as the whole lower chamber, and 1,800 out of the 2,400 and something municipalities. And I'm not naive. I know what happened during the political season. Every single aspect is going to be overblown and it's going to be politicized. And this is an issue that is so important that I don't want to have the risk of being politicized. I want to have a technical discussion and an agreement in principle, and then hopefully be able to construct post-election the conditions to have a meaningful discussion. The other thing that I think we need to change it is the way in which is usually discussed, which is, let's start with how much you need and which taxes you want to raise. And I think we need to put the issue upside down. Let's start by discussing what the country needs, what it needs in education, what it needs in health, and then try to add up how much does that require, so that it's easier for people to understand what their taxes are going to be used for. So rather than having a discussion in the abstract about an increase on revenue. But also I want to build up on something that it's I think it's an extremely window of opportunity, but it's a window of opportunity that is not going to be permanent there. What COVID brought was very, very large, very painful things, but it brought a few very little bright spots. One of them is the idea that a collective exit from one of these problems, the pandemic, requires collective action and responsibility from everybody. When somebody gets a shot, it's inoculated, but it also reduces the chance of a third party to being infected. And this sense of collective responsibility, of social responsibility, is what you need to pass a tax reform. To understand that we may pay more taxes, but somebody will receive the goods, or we may receive the goods of that down the road.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. As they say, don't waste a good crisis, and I hope you find a path forward.
Thank you, Tony.
Minister Herrera, we want to thank you for your time today, and we want to wish you best of luck this week at the IMF World Bank meetings and going forward in the Mexican recovery process. And I want to thank everyone for joining, our participants and our senior fellows. We're going to be covering the IMF World Bank meetings all week. We have a session at the GeoEconomics Center on Wednesday on decoding the world economic outlook. So please stay with us. And I want to turn to my colleague, Jason Marzak, director of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center, to close this event out.
Thank you, Josh. Mr. Herrera, your comments clearly show the incredibly important job you're doing navigating the COVID-induced economic contraction, as well as your thinking about what a post-COVID economy looks like in Mexico. I wanted to also reinforce to please continue to count on us, the Atlantic Council, the Agent Orange Latin America Center, to do our part in strengthening U.S.-Mexico ties with the recognition of what that plays for Mexico's broader economic recovery. As well, Bosco asked you, Minister, about Central America. A quick plug for all of our guests here that will be hosting Costa Rican President Alvarado in about 2 hours at 10:30 Washington time to look at COVID's economic contraction in Costa Rica and also steps to recovery. As Adrienne noted at the beginning, Mr. Herrera, we wish you all the best for a very busy week ahead. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to having you join us next time, hopefully at the physical Atlantic Council. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm sure it will be an in-presence meeting at that time. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you, Secretary. Bye.